Hi, I'm Celine, welcome back to my channel, and I own a lot of books. So once in a while I usually count my collection, which honestly is just a bit of fun, so there's no real reason for why I do it. I just like to know what I own. And I thought it would be fun to take you along with me this time. So the last time I counted my books was in April 2023, which means that probably a lot has changed in the last year. So I'll take you through it. I will tell you how many books I had a year ago, and then I will go through the house and count some books and show you some bookshelves and fun stuff like that. And I will also make some predictions about how many books I think I gained in that year, and I expect to be really wrong, but we'll see how it goes. And I'll see that I actually last counted in July 2023, so it wasn't April, so it's slightly less long ago. So when I last counted, I had 574 books, which includes what I call reference books. So I also have things like dictionaries, like course books, language books, that sort of thing, like a book that you don't really read cover to cover. So it's not fiction or it's not a narrative non-fiction kind of book. Like a reference work I don't expect to really read. So that number includes all of those things. So without the reference books, I had 555 books, and out of those I had read 286, which meant that I had read about 51.5% of all the books I owned at that point. Which means that at that point I read a little bit over half of my collection, and that is the point where I want to stay. I would like to have read about half, I wouldn't mind having read 60-70% of my collection, but I do like having a large collection that I can peruse and choose books that feel like exciting and things that I'm looking forward to. And I understand that perhaps this collection seems like a little bit overly large or slightly ridiculous, and I totally understand that. I personally read about, it really depends on the year, but I often read 75 books a year, sometimes 100. So having a collection where I basically have the amount of unread books that would last me, say, 3 years feels quite manageable to me. It's not like if I suddenly stopped buying books that I would have to read for like 10 or 20 years to finally get through all the books I already own. So in terms of my expectations for this year, I think, first of all, I have probably passed 600 books. I expect, because I have bought a fair amount of books. I have also moved more books from, I have some books that are still in the Netherlands where I'm from. They're at my mum's house, and slowly but surely we are trying to move them to where I live now. So that does mean that my collection here grows, but it doesn't actually mean that I'm spending any money on it particularly. So my guess is going to be, say, 650 books, including reference books. And in terms of how many books of those I have read, so if we take out the reference books again, like the percentage that I've read, I think I've probably dropped a little bit. My guess is that I've dropped to about 50%. I'm actually hoping it'll be 50% and that I didn't just buy and buy books and then read other books that I didn't own. Now, in terms of counting, I'm going to start with these shelves. We're currently in my office, and I basically have like a little wall of bookshelves. And I will tell you right now, there is no logic. There's no rhyme or reason in how I have categorized my books. So if you're like, oh, Celine, but you put this in fantasy and actually it's literary fiction, I will be like, you're probably right. But my shelves are basically, they're shelved by vibes. Let me turn you around and I will tell you how these shelves are shelved. So this is about the best angle I can get in my office. My office is quite small, so it's kind of hard to zoom out far enough that I can actually show you the shelves themselves. So the way they are sorted now is at the top left corner. So let's see if I can point. So starting from here, this starts with travel books. So you can see a couple of travel books on the left, and then it goes into non-fiction. And the way I've sorted the non-fiction is somewhat by topic and then roughly chronologically by subject. So if it's historical, it will be usually with other books about the same time period. But then if you go further along this, then you get into the biography section, which also includes letters, memoirs, that sort of thing, which again, I've sort of sorted vaguely chronologically. Then that continues down here. So it goes up till there and then goes down here. So here you see a biography of Virginia Woolf. Because on the top left is where I keep a lot of my fantasy hardcovers. If we continue down the biography shelf, you then go into basically what I would say literary fiction, classics, that type of book. And that goes down along this way and then down. And that is sorted by alphabetical order of author last name. Now, I have to admit that that creates a weird dichotomy between the top shelves and the bottom shelves. For example, I have my Virginia Woolf books on the bottom shelf because most of them are fiction. But then I have nonfiction about Virginia Woolf in the nonfiction section, and I think I'm going to rearrange everything for it to just be sorted by topic rather than the arbitrary distinctions that I've made now. Which will mean that people will not be able to find anything on my shelves ever, but that's fine. As long as I can find things, I'm quite happy. Then right here we have a tiny bit of a poetry section. I've got some reference books there, and then this on the right is all fantasy and other things. Again, what I decide is fantasy or belongs on the fantasy shelf is pretty arbitrary. There's also some science fiction, some horror, some contemporary fantasy. I don't know. It's sorted by vibes. And then on some lower shelves that you can't see right now is where I keep some more reference books. So dictionaries, study books, that sort of thing. Now this bookshelf is really difficult to capture on camera, so I'm doing my best, but it's hard because there is no natural light in this corridor. So it's at the top of the staircase, which means that it is the perfect place for me to store rare or old books. They're a bit hard to see, but they're all on the bottom shelf. So all of the vintage books that I have, books that are pretty much like 100 to 100 years old, I store in this bookshelf. It's always best to protect your books from particularly sunlight as well as dampness and changes in temperature. So if you can avoid putting a bookshelf against an outer wall, that can be good because condensation can form at the back of the bookshelf. Now, this is probably the only place in the house that is in an internal wall, no direct light, so it's absolutely perfect for perhaps my more tender and sensitive books. This bookshelf also has a ton of my fantasy books. Again, no real rhyme or reason. And you'll see that there's a gap at the top right, which is I recently did a video where I tried some chapters of fantasy books, and all of the books that I managed to decide to get rid of came from this shelf. So I now have a nice amount of space there, which means that I can rearrange some of my books and put them in there. Now these are the bane of my existence. Not these specific 4 books, these books are lovely, but I have a tendency to create little stacks of books around the house, and they are not neatly shelved, and they have a tendency to multiply. And this is the dining room shelf where I keep a ton of fantasy books, some Sherlock Holmes, some Jane Austen, as well as mysteries and thrillers. Again, don't ask me why. Alright, it took some counting, but I've got the result. If you want to hazard any guesses how many books you think I have, feel free to guess now and then compare your answer with the actual answer. So the amount of books that I own, that includes reference books, even cookbooks, like I am counting all of the books, graphic novels, manga, everything. Just absolutely everything that is mine, that is in book form. And the total of that is 704, which is definitely more than I expected. I'm not feeling too bad about it. I did not realize that I had collected quite so many books in 1 year. I did go to the charity shop quite a few times, so maybe this shouldn't have come as a surprise. If I exclude reference books like dictionaries and stuff, I have 678 books. And out of those, I have read 353, which means that my read percentage is 52%. Now this is the statistic that I'm really thrilled about. I really thought that because I'd been accumulating more books that my unread percentage had grown perhaps a little bit too much. It turns out, however, that I've actually been keeping on top of my growing TBR. So that actually feels pretty good. I'm happy about that. Doesn't mean that I can now buy even more books. I'm trying to keep it manageable. I also have to admit that while I was going through my shelves, I definitely saw some books where I was like, I'm not sure I'm still interested in this. I could probably put that on my donation pile, which is one of the reasons that I really like going through all of my shelves, counting all of the books, including all the books that live in little piles around the house. Because it's very easy to lose track of a large collection, especially if it's spread around your house, as my collection happens to be. It's very nice to actually know what you have, and I definitely saw some books where I was like, oh, I didn't know that I had that. That's really exciting. Let me know in the comments whether or not you sometimes count your collection of books, whether you have certain goals for them, or whether you are just happy to go with the flow. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you again sometime soon. Bye!